Right. Uh, This is your Gaza War Sit Rep day 207. Sorry, I usually check my levels before I start recording, but today it's amateur hour. I'm a little frazzled by the raid on Columbia. First things first, the raid on Columbia University. The NYPD seems to have taken a gigantic army. The NYPD is the size of many armies and funded to the tune of many armies. So in the world, I suppose at some point they were going to have to use it, and they used it as only defenders of Israel can in a massive attack on a educational institution. I just tweeted earlier that Israel deploys its military against hospitals, and now the American police are deploying their paramilitary, militarized armed force against universities. So we have the armed against the unarmed, and it looks like you would imagine it would look in such a case. Pretty revolting spectacle, and I don't really think this is how it works. I don't really think this is going to make the problem go away. There is a structural question. Thank you to everyone who commented on the idea of building an academy and resetting the university. I have been in touch with people about this, and we are going to keep working on this. And it looks like there will be a need for this moving forward. So thank you. And you'll be hearing more, and you'll be seeing more as we continue to work on it. I want to do it right. So I'm not going to rush, and I'm going to work with other people on it. The structural problem, like I said, with the university is a university doesn't need to be a bank. It doesn't need to be an asset manager. But to do otherwise, you'd have to get back to the relationship between teachers and students, between research and teaching and the university's mission. And that's lost. It's been completely lost in these universities now. And so now it's a fight over, and now Columbia has become a fully administrative. There's not going to be anything going on. The police are going to, according to the invitation of the president, who doesn't have the right to make this invitation, the police, who don't have the right to be on Columbia, are going to be on Columbia until May 17th. They're going to be occupying the university. The New York police are going to be occupying Columbia University for until 2 days after graduation. All right. Well, the university students are very innovative, they're very creative, they're very resourceful, and they have our support. And they're gonna be all right. They're gonna figure out their next move, and they're gonna think, and they're gonna keep going as they see fit. And what they need from us is as much as we can do to help them make it through this repression. And they're gonna be okay. They're gonna be fine. And so I'll leave that discussion there. They also are more than capable of speaking for themselves, and I'm sure you're all following it very closely right now, as I will probably return to as soon as I'm done recording this video. But let's go over the news of the day. The International Court of Justice did not order provisional measures against Germany, Nicaragua's case that Germany was complicit in genocide against the Palestinians. The International Court of Justice decided against provisional measures, against ordering Germany not to continue its arms sales. Germany supplies apparently something like 30% of Israel's weapons, which is pretty amazing. Germany just stubbornly on the wrong side of history on every genocide that they get a chance to be. So this is interesting because if you look at the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and all the buzz you've been hearing, and I continue to say, I continue to predict that these arrest warrants against Israeli officials are not happening. The ICC is not going to do this. It would be defying everything I know or think I know about the ICC if they do this. So I'm continuing to predict that that's not going to happen. What I think is interesting, though, is that the International Court of Justice does appear to be pretty well calibrated in its decisions in this sense. They ordered Israel take provisional measures to prevent genocide, knowing that Israel doesn't follow international law and doesn't care and is very explicit that they have the backing of the US and they don't give a damn what the court says. And they didn't order provisional measures against Germany because Germany likes to be seen as a law-abiding country. They like to be seen to follow the law. So they didn't force Germany into a position of having to defy international law and kind of spit on the court. Instead, they didn't make that order. So they ordered measures. They made a finding against Israel, knowing Israel doesn't care. And they made a finding for Germany, knowing that Germany, it is more of Germany's brand to try to be seen as following international law. Okay, that's the ICJ. Fatah and Hamas, the two probably most powerful Palestinian factions, political parties, had a meeting brokered by China in China, and they made some general statements about unity, which is to the good. I think if you try to analyze what China's trying to do here, based on what China's been doing in the region, it's clear that China's probably trying to do something like they did with Iran and Saudi, right? They're trying to get them to a point where they're not at odds. And if Fatah and Hamas, if the Palestinian Authority doesn't fight the Palestinian resistance in the West Bank, then the situation in the West Bank will change. It's already, as I've been reporting, very dynamic in the West Bank. There's tremendous resistance all over the West Bank now. John Elmer likes to say that if Gaza war wasn't happening, we would be calling the West Bank an intifada right now, given the scale of the resistance, the scale of the uprising, and the growing trajectory of the uprising in the West Bank. So there's already been some kind of marginalization of the Palestinian Authority. It's the Israelis that are having to go in and invade and raid and take the casualties, the improvised explosive devices, the gunfire. So it is the Israeli army that's having to do these things directly in the West Bank, but there is still this presence of the Palestinian Authority as a subcontractor. The Palestinian Authority belongs to Fatah, and if Fatah, whose leader Mahmoud Abbas recently said again that our duty is to protect Israel or something. Israel deserves security and it is our duty to provide it or something. He's still on that track. But if Fatah and Hamas can come to some kind of accord, then and the Palestinian Authority is willing to get out of the way, then that will also change the nature of the conflict in the West Bank. It'll become more favorable to the resistance. So I don't know if that's China's intent, but China's definitely by brokering these dialogues between Hamas and Fatah, they're definitely on the track to an outcome like that. Okay, inside Israel, you had this Smotrich, some kind of Smotrich says basically we have to go into Rafah, we have to go into here, we have to go into there, we have to destroy everything. So another big statement of genocidal intent and the kinds of things of along the lines of like we don't deserve, Israel doesn't deserve to exist if we don't go into Rafah. So these are the kinds of things they're saying. Netanyahu says we're going into Rafah, whether there's a deal or no deal, whatever the Hague says, we're going into Rafah. And I just wanted to reiterate that I think they are going to go into Rafah. I know there's debates about this. I know that the community that's watching the war is divided on this question. I I think to analyze, as I've been saying, to analyze it in terms of strategic objectives, in terms of war aims, in terms of costs and benefits to Israel, Rafah doesn't make sense. But in terms of Israel's orgy of anti-civilian violence, in terms of the bloodlust of the population, in terms of the genocidality of it all, in terms of the army, um, army's further disintegration, all of those factors, which have been the factors that have determined how this war has gone, and not unlike the invasion of Colombia this evening that's happening as I'm recording this, these are not rational strategic moves. These are um, some kind of psychological satisfaction that they're trying to get out of using the military in this way. And they're willing to sacrifice, they're willing to lose, they're willing to turn their army more into a rabble. They're willing to take casualties because there will be casualties in Rafah. There will be major casualties in Rafah. The same way that Israel has been stalling, the Palestinian resistance has been preparing for Rafah. They've been talking about nothing else. How could the resistance not be ready, be extremely ready for an invasion of Rafah? The um the one idea, the one military idea that I've seen going around is the idea that um Israel's going to set up checkpoints for men. So they're going to let women leave Rafah. Where? Are they going to let them go back home? They're going to let women leave Rafah, supposedly, and then they're just going to massacre all the men that leave, that remain behind. Well, problem with that is checkpoints are posts that are collections of soldiers in a single location, identifiable and static location. You can't really have a roving checkpoint, and a checkpoint by its nature is going to come under attack. So if they try to set up these checkpoints around Rafah, these checkpoints are going to become the targets of ambushes, the same way that setting up around Shifa Hospital 2.0, the second invasion of Shifa Hospital, ended in the withdrawal of troops because the troops that were committing the massacre in the hospital were getting attacked in their staging areas. They were getting, the snipers that were trying to cover the massacre were getting killed by resistance snipers. The gatherings of soldiers in apartments and positions that they chose came under attack by RPGs and other weapons, explosives, mines. So there's no reason to think anything otherwise would happen in Rafah. This is exactly what's going to happen in Rafah. So this checkpoint idea, they're going to have a checkpoint and then they're going to massacre everybody. That's another one of these plans that Israel floats to see the reaction. It's part of the psychological warfare. It's part of the idea that they can go where they want and do what they want in Gaza, which they can't. They have to win the war first, as I've said on this channel numerous times. So those are just to give you a sense of what I think is happening. They've been bombing Rafah more intensely, and I think there's going to be some kind of invasion of Rafah. um, before the end, and it's probably going to be the next thing that they do. I mean, the next thing that they do is bombing, of course, but they bomb every day. They're killing the same 100 people every day that they've been doing or more. But their next big move will be Rafah, and it's probably going to happen. And I don't want people to feel despair because we failed to prevent an invasion of Rafah. We can only work towards the end of the war, the end of the siege, the freedom for Palestine. That's what we can do. We can't, if we had the power to stop a particular military move in this war, we would have had the power to stop the whole war. So that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to build towards. But don't despair when Rafah is invaded. It's just another part of the war. It's just another campaign of the war. It's another intolerable, horrific part of the war and genocide against civilians. But um, it is baked into what Israel has been doing and what Israel is doing and where Israel is headed. Okay, news from the fronts. The West Bank, you probably heard that Birzeit University students chased off the genocidal German ambassador. So after everything that Germany's been up to, their ambassador was trying to inaugurate some kind of museum. I think Abdel Jawad Omar said they wanted to turn Palestine into a museum, and the students weren't having it, so he had to go. Gaza, there's a number of operations that need to be reported on. There was Al-Qassam Brigades, Hamas's armed wing, hit a D9 bulldozer with a Yasin 105. There's video. I'm sure you'll see it tomorrow on the Electronic Intifada live stream. There was, in terms of other things you'll probably see tomorrow, spoiler alert, there was a big ambush using unexploded bombs by Qassam engineering unit in Al Maghraqa in central Gaza. They made a poster that basically said your goods were returned to you. They also, because these are unexploded bombs from aerial bombardment, and they made a poster saying your goods were returned to you, meaning they blew them up with the same weapons that they were trying to bomb Gaza with. So they also made I think it was the Mujahideen brigades. No, Qassam again. No, Mujahideen brigades. They made a video also of they're attacking Israeli troops in the Netzarim corridor, and they're saying your presence here will mean a major loss for you. So it's a warning. It's also these shelling attacks have had a bigger effect. I don't know whether it's the nature of the shelling attacks and rocket attacks generally get better the longer the war goes on. They get better at targeting. They get better. Um, they get I don't know. They seem to have more effect and some at some point it's also an accumulation of damage, an accumulation of attacks, and the Israelis have been in this so-called Netzarim corridor for a while now, and I think the shelling attacks are starting to tell. So there have been evacuations of troops, helicopter evacuations we've seen just from these mortar and shelling attacks on them. So again, when you think of the invasion of Rafah, remember that the invasion of Rafah also entails more of this kind of shelling and mortars on Israeli soldiers. So there's soon going to have to be a sit rep on the American naval dock. They've been talking about the naval dock, the American. I mentioned that it might have been delayed partly because of logistical and repair problems, but it does seem like it's arriving or arrived, and they're starting to work on it. And there's someone named Matt Gates. I believe, is a politician, and Matt Gaetz, Representative Matt Gaetz, Congressman, uh, and he said something like, yeah, he said it's possible that U.S. troops could get into a firefight with Gaza. I'm on Matt Gaetz's Twitter. It says Matt Gaetz gets Lloyd Austin to admit that there is a likelihood our service members on Gaza pier could be shot at, and they have the authority and ability to shoot back. So Gaetz says, oh, maybe I'll just show this tweet. It's a moment where Gaetz is saying, this is a very telling moment, Mr. Secretary, because you've said something that's quite possible that could happen. Shots from Gaza on our service members, and then response, our armed service members shooting live fire into Gaza. That's a possible outcome here so that we can become the Port Authority and run this pier. Is that right? And Austin says, that's correct. So this pier that we've been talking about and scratching our heads about, and why hasn't it happened? And now it's maybe happening, is going to end up with Americans fighting the Palestinian resistance in Gaza. And the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, said, they made a statement yesterday saying, we warn Britain or any other country. Interesting formulation, because it's clear that it's America that's building this pier, but they said Britain or any other country against deploying any forces on the land or coast of the Gaza Strip. Such forces will be treated as occupying forces and will be legitimate targets for resistance. So we now have the all of the basis, all of the seeds for a confrontation, direct military fighting between the Palestinian resistance and the American Navy. So whatever buffer Israel provided from Americans having to kill Palestinians directly is increasingly gone if this pier goes through. And once again, I do not understand this pier. I don't understand what they're doing. And if they wanted to enter the war, I don't know why they don't just go in with the Israelis. Why don't they just go in and attack Palestinians alongside the Israelis? I don't know why they have to do it via this pier, but we will certainly report on it as it unfolds. We'll see what they do. Lebanon, there have been more very effective rocket and missile and drone attacks all over the front. You've probably seen the Israelis announcing that they're going to go in and they're going to invade Lebanon and they're going to occupy Lebanon. I mean, I don't think that I don't think they have the ability to do that. 2006 was not successful, and they have not gotten stronger, and Hezbollah has. So this is not an area in which Israel is advancing whatsoever. This is an area where Israel is taking progressively more damage. Yemen front, Ansar Allah said they targeted 2 destroyers in the Red Sea. I don't know if I mentioned that. No. And there's also, they targeted a ship called the Cyclades, Cyclades. That's a place, it's an island, I think, around Greece. Anyway, that's the name of the ship. And Ansar Allah announced that they targeted it. So news from all the fronts, lots of fighting. I think Rafah is going to happen. A Fatah Hamas meeting in China, the ICJ not ordering provisional measures against Germany. So a big news day, and then that's without even talking about Colombia, which I think this is another case where the implications are going to go on for a long time. This was not a good thing for American power to be sending the entire militarized New York police against a campus like that. And if that's the future, I mean, a lot of these universities make money from international students. There are international students who pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to these universities. Who's gonna want look at the scenes that they're showing? Look at what they're doing on these campuses. Who's gonna want to go there? I don't know. Maybe people still want to go there. I don't know. This looks like irreversible damage to their brands, to their corporate brands. I don't know. I don't know what they're I don't know. I don't know. It doesn't look like something that is easily recovered from to me. Okay. That is the end. If you want to get off the train, that is the news. I wanted to talk a little bit about a mini lecture today about lying, about the role of lying. I know apparently Mearsheimer wrote a book about lying. I've never read the book about lying. I read a science fiction book about lying. Ursula Le Guin wrote this book about like everybody learns how to communicate telepathically, and you can't lie telepathically, but then there's a group of aliens or something, and they learn how to lie telepathically, and that enables them to sort of take over the world for a while or take over the galaxy or whatever it is. It's like, how do you beat if you can't lie and they can? How do you detect it? How do you? It's an interesting concept for speculative fiction, because it is something like what we face when we are trying to grapple with the pro-Israel people, Israeli spokespeople, pro-Israel lobby people, etc. The whole Zionism, the ideology of Zionism, and I think the structural role of lying is very important in the pro-Israel project, and I think that it was really brought out with October 7th because every once in a while, when we go back, John Elmer and I, we're always going back to October 7th. We're always looking for new facts that emerge in the Israeli media or new statements or videos from Hamas or anyone, any videos, any testimonies, anything that we can find, we keep going back to because we want to find out exactly what happened on October 7th. And we know a lot now. We know a lot from the Israeli press. We know a lot from the what we were able to put together. We know from surveillance footage. We know from Hamas's own footage and statements. We have a picture that we can put together. But then every once in a while, you ask yourself, could Hamas have done things differently on October 7th that wouldn't have led to a genocide? And I've talked about this idea a lot, right? The idea that Hamas brought it on themselves or Palestinians brought it on themselves and refuted that specific um, apologetics for genocide, basically, the way that it absolves the Israelis, the people who are actually committing the genocide, of responsibility. But when you ask yourself that, what you're really asking is, could they have done the attack of October 7th in a way that that made it impossible for the Israelis to lie about what happened? Because what actually happened is this military raid, many police and military casualties, many civilian casualties of adults at this concert. Probably most of the adults who were killed on October 7th killed by Israeli military helicopter gunships at the music festival, chasing down people who were headed back to Gaza and shooting them full of incendiary ammunition. Israelis killed at checkpoints by border police, Israelis killed in their kibbutzes by Israeli tank shelling and tank gunfire. All of these deaths lied about methodically, admitted that it happened, that there was a Hannibal order and Ronan Bregman's articles about it in Ynet, but lied about and counted as Hamas executions of civilians, etc. Lies of complete fabrication about mass rapes, complete fabrication about systematic killing of children, which Israel is doing, both of which Israel is doing, but actual complete fabricated lies about the baby being baked in an oven, complete fabricated lies, and then lies to cover up the Israeli military. So how could Hamas compete with that? How could the Palestinians, it's one thing to say the Palestinians can develop a military that can defeat the Israeli military through the ingenious nature of a tunnel network and training specifically against the Israeli weapons, and by getting really close and by using a doctrine of getting as many of these light weapons into the hands of as many fighters as possible, and being incredibly motivated and courageous, and developing a system of rockets and missiles under the guidance of the Iranians. So that's all possible. It's been proven to be possible because it's happening. But how do you actually address systematic lying about what you did? How can you do that? It's like they released a document sometime later saying this is our narrative, these things didn't happen, but how can you address as a resistance movement and a thing like the New York Times is screams without words story, which apparently 60 or 59 journalism professors in the US have demanded an investigation into the fabrications behind that. But how can the lies are they're so egregious, the things that they're saying are so horrific. How do you how do you address that? How can you answer those? And um, being able to do that, being able to lie with such passion, with such fluency, is such a powerful weapon in the pro-Israel arsenal. They do it like Blinken, the way Blinken just told that lie about Hamas people murdering a family and eating lunch with the dead, posing the dead corpses and eating lunch. Like that was a complete lie. The way Biden lied about seeing beheaded babies, they just lied, and it's amazing. It's a powerful weapon. It's a powerful weapon because human nature doesn't. We don't want to believe somebody would just lie like that. We always look for some. Maybe they're misinformed. Did they believe it? Do they believe, when you watch Star Trek, right? The old Star, I'm old. I watched Star Trek The Next Generation. They had someone on the crew that could tell if the other people were lying. And the question was always, is he lying? And they would always say, well, he believes what he's saying. So do they even believe what they're saying? And no, I think a lot of the times, I mean, the people who actually made it up, they don't believe it. How could they believe it? They know it's not true. Um, and they've been lying about the protesters. They've been lying about the protests and the encampments at the highest levels of politics. They lie. Someone said there was a pretty good tweet about it where someone said basically like whatever happens at Columbia, it's the government that's responsible because they've been lying about these students for weeks now. They've been lying since the beginning about the nature of the protests, about what the students are doing, what the students want. It's all lies, and they do it, like I said, with such fluency. What where I think there's some extra insight to be scraped out of this, the power of the lie, is in um the idea that nobody ever really lies. You probably heard that. I don't think that's true, but there's something to it. There's some kind of psychological insight because what they're expressing when they say, when they claim mass sexual violence or when they claim violence against children, like I said, both of which Israel systematically and methodically commits against Palestinians. What they're saying, they're expressing a kind of an emotional truth about their feeling of racial superiority. So like it's not that these things happen to them. It's that these things, it feels so bad that their army was defeated that it might as well have happened, that these horrible things might as well have happened. It feels so bad that people that are supposed to be under their boots permanently were able to break out of those constraints and attack their military directly. Feels like such a violation that they talk about it as they tell stories that are false about actual violation, in the sense of like sexual violation and crime. So it's a kind of truth when they lie, and you can see that because they don't really care about the acts. Because when pro-Israel people are confronted with even evidence of rapes or evidence of rapes committed by the Israelis or murders, the things that we're seeing emerging from the hospitals where they're zip tying children and shooting them, or piling them into mass graves, executing patients and medical workers, sniping medical workers. When they see that, they go, war is hell. It's too bad. And lots of people have said, okay, but then how do you argue against October 7th then if these kinds of crimes can be brushed off with a war is hell? War is hell. There's no innocence. Hamas did it. Hamas is responsible. Hamas sacrificed their people. So that inconsistency is not inconsistency, right? It's that phrase you probably see on Twitter. It's not hypocrisy, it's hierarchy. They there's a fully consistent sense that we are allowed to do these things to our inferiors, but it's absolutely intolerable that we might lose that sense of superiority, that we might lose that sense of that we might have challenged that sense that we can do whatever we want. And sexual violations in particular, there have been so many campus counter protesters who have expressed the wish of sexual violation on pro-Palestine people, right? You've probably seen the Iranian pro-Israel person who's like, oh, I hope go to Gaza, I hope they, and then expressing the hope that somebody commits a sexual crime against the pro-Palestine person. So that is, how can you be so stridently, like how can you make up and then bring up a fabricated story of this happening on October 7th as an engine of outrage, and also the same people from the same political tendencies say, I hope this happens to you, and like as a funny little gotcha or like a little joke. Well, it is because it is um it is about their freedom to do what they want and about their racial superiority ultimately, which is expressed in all kinds of ways. I mentioned Superman and Nietzsche and all of that in a previous video, and it is that the master race does what they like, and and there's a whole master race doing what they like in terms of violence, in terms of the violence they can do to whom they choose, to their inferiors, to anybody, because they're superior. There's also a master race can do what they like in terms of the truth. They can do whatever they want with the truth. They don't have to follow facts or logic or critical thinking or reasoning the way that ordinary people do. They can reason as they like. They can make up their own truths. They can make up their own reality. They can tell their narrative, and it must be accepted because of who they are. And they impose the acceptance of their story. They don't convince you. They don't have to convince you. They have to, they just have to say it. And if you don't believe them, you are the problem. And then there's a series of punishments for you, starting with, of course, the fact that you will be, before any other violence happens to you, you will be lied about in the most vicious ways. So, racial superiority is applied to both violence, the right to kill whoever we choose, the right to violate the bodies of whoever we choose whenever we want. And racial superiority is also expressed in terms of ideas, truth, facts. We are the ones who tell you what's true. We are the ones who tell you what happened. We are the ones who tell you who is a criminal, who is a victim. That is for us to tell you and for you to follow. And I think that if you understand that that's where it's coming from, a lot of their ability to just tell an outright lie is revealed. You can understand a lot of how they think and how they behave. So I think I'll stop there and go back to looking at what's happening at Columbia and in New York, because that's what you're gonna do too. So I will we'll be watching for the pier, we'll be watching for the fronts, and I'll be back. In the meantime, hang in there, comment, like, subscribe, and check out the Electronic Intifada live stream. That'll be tomorrow at noon.